tonight, we're setting aside rebellions and powdered wigs. Instead, let's step into the slightly damp world of colonial Boston, where the streets are muddy, the air smells faintly of fish, and the drama rarely rises above a neighbor's fence dispute. From morning fires to market stalls, this is a soft-spoken journey into the daily grind of a New England town, still figuring out indoor plumbing. Perfect for sleep, study, or just a gentle escape from the 21st century. The first light in colonial Boston filters through oiled paper windows, because glass, of course, is for the truly ambitious or recklessly wealthy. As dawn creeps across crooked rooftops, the city stirs with a series of reluctant yawns and creaking floorboards. Beds, if you can call them that, are stuffed with straw or feathers, and they creak in protest as their occupants rise far too early for anyone's taste. Roosters take their job with aggressive sincerity. Their crowing pierces the morning stillness with the subtlety of a cannon. No one hits snooze. They hit their shins on low bedposts and start the day with a quiet curse. Most homes are single-room affairs with a hearth in the center and a notable lack of privacy. If you thought morning breath was bad, try morning breath shared by 8 people in a room the size of a modern pantry. Parents, children, the occasional apprentice, they all move around each other like clumsy barn cats, bumping elbows as they reach for stockings or wooden shoes. The hearth is lit with yesterday's ashes and a prayer. The fire must be coaxed back to life with flint, tinder, and the kind of muttered encouragement usually reserved for stubborn mules. Water for tea or porridge is fetched from a well or a communal pump, assuming the pump isn't frozen shut or hosting a family of frogs. Breakfast is functional rather than delightful. Cornmeal mush, perhaps, with a pat of butter if fortune smiled yesterday. Maybe a scrap of salt pork, boiled until its feelings were thoroughly hurt. It's food that doesn't try too hard, which is convenient because no one has time for culinary whimsy before 6 a.m. And so begins the day, not with revolution or fanfare, but with grumbling stomachs, smoky rooms, and the noble realization that it's still only Tuesday. Stepping outside in colonial Boston is a full sensory experience. If your senses include cold, damp, and a faint but persistent whiff of fish. The streets are technically roads, but they behave more like suggestion-based trails made of mud, cobbles, and despair. Horse manure is a constant presence, as are the horses themselves, clopping by with expressions of silent judgment. The lanes twist around the town like someone sketched them during a sneeze. There's no grid here, just the old paths of cattle, which apparently had no regard for future urban planning. Buildings lean inward at odd angles, like nosy neighbors eavesdropping across an alley. Wooden signs creak in the breeze, announcing inns, apothecaries, and the occasional shop that sells both buttons and tobacco. Because why not? The street is already busy, though it's only mid-morning. A merchant hauls barrels onto a cart with a grunt and a muttered complaint about his hernia. Women in aprons carry baskets of laundry to the communal wash area, navigating puddles with the grace of someone who's accepted the inevitability of wet socks. Children dart through the crowd with alarming speed, usually sticky, always barefoot. A fishmonger calls out his wares with a volume that suggests the fish are deaf. Cod, perch, eel, freshly caught, and only moderately terrifying in appearance. The smell is robust, but it's a smell that says, this is a city that eats what it has, which is probably the nicest way to describe colonial cuisine. Chickens roam freely, which is to say they are everywhere and no one truly knows who owns them. They cluck, peck, and occasionally startle passers-by into dropping things. Every town has a chicken that knows too much. Boston has at least 3. And above all this chaos, the meeting house bell tolls, a sound both dignified and deeply annoying when you're just trying to mind your business and not trip over a goose. By mid-morning, the list of tasks has already formed a small, intimidating tower in everyone's mind. Colonial life does not believe in leisure before the sun reaches its peak. If you're not doing something productive, you're probably ill, lazy, or, worst of all, a teenager. Water needs fetching, which means a trip to the nearest pump or well, sometimes half a street away, sometimes farther. The buckets are wooden, heavy, and wildly unergonomic. Each slosh is a test of core strength and emotional fortitude. It's a job usually assigned to the nearest child with functional arms and a vague sense of direction. Meanwhile, wood must be chopped. It's never not wood chopping season. A small pile of logs stares accusingly from beside the house, daring someone to turn them into firewood before the next frost or awkward family dinner. Axes are passed down from generation to generation, mostly because no one can afford a new one. Splinters are plentiful and character building. Inside, someone is scrubbing. Floors, pots, faces, everything gets scrubbed whether it likes it or not. Soap is homemade, usually from animal fat and lye, which smells as pleasant as it sounds. It gets the job done, but it also threatens to strip the skin off your hands if you scrub with the enthusiasm of a person trying to impress a neighbor. Clothing is mended while standing, sitting, or occasionally yelling at a younger sibling to hold still, or I'll sew your sleeve to the table again. Needles are precious. Dropping one is cause for a brief but intense family-wide search party. And then there's the garden. If you have one, you're out there pulling weeds that never asked to exist in the first place. If you don't, you're probably borrowing someone else's patch or pretending that moss counts as a useful crop. By noon, everyone smells faintly of effort and very strongly of something earthy. And still, the day isn't even halfway over. Welcome to Boston. Noon arrives with the soft clank of utensils and the faint hope of something edible. Meals in colonial Boston are not exactly culinary escapades. They're more like edible pauses in a schedule full of splinters. Lunch, or dinner, as it's often called, is the main meal of the day, which is mildly insulting to supper, but emotionally accurate. The table is usually a sturdy wooden affair, built to survive generations of elbows and minor existential crises. Benches creak under the weight of family members and one suspiciously large dog, who pretends not to be begging. Everyone gathers around, hungry, tired, and hoping the stew doesn't taste like last week's stew. It does. The meal might feature salt pork, which is pork's answer to becoming shelf-stable and deeply committed to sodium. It's boiled with root vegetables, some of which still taste vaguely like dirt, but at least they're seasonal dirt. Bread appears, slightly stale, but doing its best. Butter, if available, is rationed like treasure. Those with connections, or cows, might have cheese, which is both nourishment and a subtle flex. Ale is common, especially among adults, because the water is more of a gamble than a beverage. Children might drink a weaker version, or just watered-down milk, assuming the cow was cooperative that morning and didn't express her grievances with a kick. Conversation during meals is minimal, not out of rudeness, but practicality. Chewing hard bread requires focus. The occasional joke might surface, a jab at the neighbor's goose, or the absurdity of trying to plant lettuce in this soil. But mostly, it's a chorus of spoons scraping bowls and mothers reminding everyone to chew properly and sit up straight, even if the chair's missing a leg. After eating, there's no nap, no digestive, no moment of reflective joy. Plates are cleared, and it's back to work, because time doesn't stop just because you ate a turnip. There's more wood to chop, more goods to trade, and possibly a bucket to retrieve that someone left at the well 3 days ago. It's still there. Probably. Afternoons in Colonial Boston are when the clanging truly begins. For those not occupied with farming, fishing, or complaining about their rheumatism, the trades offer another flavor of exhaustion. Craftsmen, shoemakers, coopers, blacksmiths, tailors spend these hours shaping, stitching, or smelting things with steady hands and the firm knowledge that machines won't be taking their jobs for at least another century. At the heart of many shops is the apprentice, usually a teenage boy with a patchy mustache and a look of quiet regret. The apprentice is bound to a master for anywhere from 5 to 7 years. In return for food, shelter, and a lifetime's worth of blistering humility, he learns a trade. Learning, in this case, often involves sweeping, fetching, and being blamed for everything that mysteriously falls off a shelf. In the blacksmith's forge, iron is heated until it glows like the underside of a temperamental sunburn. The smith pounds it into shape with the kind of rhythm that makes nearby chickens nervous. Sparks fly, sweat pours, and the smell of scorched everything fills the air. Apprentices, meanwhile, try not to pass out while manning the bellows. Elsewhere, in quieter but equally cluttered shops, tailors bend over cloth with squinted eyes and aching backs. Patterns are traced on rough fabric, needles dance, and thread is pulled with a hiss of concentration. If you ever want to see a man express existential despair in a single sigh, watch him realize he's stitched the wrong sleeve onto the right jacket. Coopers make barrels, a task that looks deceptively simple, until you realize that wooden staves are about as cooperative as wet cats. Shoemakers tap out tiny rhythms with their hammers, cobbling soles and muttering about the quality of imported leather. Each trade has its tools, its curses, and its smell. And the apprentices, they absorb it all, skills, sarcasm, and probably tetanus. They dream of one day owning their own shop, where they too can yell at a 14-year-old for dropping the tongs again. It's the circle of trade. Brutal, noble, slightly smoky. As the afternoon wears on, the heart of the town beats loudest in the market square. Boston's market is not so much a place of efficiency as it is a controlled cacophony of shouting, bargaining, and the occasional chicken committing petty theft. It's where produce meets gossip, and where haggling is performed with the grace of two tired people arguing over turnips. Stalls line the square with cloth awnings and wobbly tables, offering whatever could be grown, caught, churned, or reluctantly bartered from someone else. Apples, root vegetables, beans, onions, dried herbs that look suspiciously like grass. Each item is displayed with pride, even if the potatoes resemble sullen river stones. The currency situation is flexible. Coins are used, yes, shillings, pence, the occasional Spanish dollar. But bartering remains alive and well. One woman offers a bundle of candles in exchange for a spool of thread and a scandalous story about her neighbour. A man tries to trade salted cod for a wool cap and is met with a look that says, "Sir, this is the third time this week." Prices are negotiable, not in the cheerful, "what a deal" sense, but in the, "are you seriously charging that much for cabbage?" kind of way. Every vendor has a cousin who grows better ones. Every buyer has a tragic cabbage-related backstory to explain why they deserve a discount. But the market isn't just about food. There are pots, pewter mugs, woolen mitts, soap cakes with grandiose names like Bayberry Breeze that smell faintly like wet rope. It's also the town's best forum for subtle, passive-aggressive communication. If someone doesn't buy your apples, they're clearly taking sides in last Sunday's church pew squabble. Children dart underfoot with sticky hands and mysterious coins. Dogs follow at a polite distance, hoping something edible will fall. And above it all, the town crier occasionally bellows updates no one asked for, usually involving taxes, ship arrivals, or who got caught sneaking into the tavern during morning prayer. By late afternoon, the market begins to wind down, and the square returns to its natural state of dishevelled calm. Half of the goods have been sold. The other half will be dinner or compost, possibly both. Back at home, the afternoon drifts into a quieter, but no less industrious rhythm. While the men may still be hammering, hauling, or arguing over barrel sizes, the domestic sphere is alive with its own brand of chaos, less loud, more sudsy. Soap making is not so much an activity as it is a hazardous domestic experiment. Lye is involved, which is just wood ash that's taken a dark turn, and fat is rendered from whatever creature was least fortunate this week. The result is a soap that both cleans and lightly threatens the epidermis. It smells vaguely of regret and bacon, but it gets the stains out. Starch in linens is another proud tradition, carried out with the kind of attention to detail typically reserved for cartography or revenge. Linens are boiled, beaten, and hung out to dry, all so they can be uncomfortably stiff when it's time for church on Sunday. The goal is to look respectable. The result is a family of people rustling like paper whenever they sit down. Then there's the food preparation. Pudding is on the menu, which sounds delightful until you realize pudding in Colonial Boston can mean almost anything not immediately lethal. It might be made of cornmeal, suet, molasses, or some combination that would startle modern pastry chefs. It's boiled in cloth, served in slices, and eaten with the conviction that this counts as dessert because someone said so 40 years ago. Other culinary masterpieces include boiled vegetables, again, pie, mostly crust, and stewed fruit that's been cooked until it has completely forgotten its original identity. The spice rack consists mostly of salt and hopeful glances. Children are roped into helping, often under the guise of learning responsibility, which mostly means peeling things and not touching the butter. The older ones churn butter, which is essentially shaking a wooden tub for 3 hours and hoping it turns into something edible before their arms fall off. By the end of the afternoon, the house smells like soap, starch, and ambition. The pudding is cooling, the linens are stiff, and dinner is only a few mild disasters away. All in all, a fairly productive day in the world of domestic science, 18th century edition. Somewhere in the midst of clattering carts and laundry lines, children are sent off to school, because even in the 18th century, someone decided that learning the alphabet was more important than chasing ducks. Schools in colonial Boston are small, stern, and slightly drafty. They operate in churches, single-room schoolhouses, or anywhere large enough to hold desks and small enough to discourage horseplay. The schoolmaster is a man of many virtues: literacy, discipline, and the ability to make a room go silent just by clearing his throat. His tools are simple: a hornbook, a stack of slates, and a facial expression that suggests he hasn't smiled since the Glorious Revolution. He also has a birch rod, which is less a teaching tool and more of a medieval motivational aid. Lessons begin with recitation. The alphabet, numbers, and moral instruction are all delivered aloud, in unison, with a kind of emotional range usually reserved for livestock auctions. Spelling is a luxury, punctuation is optional, and penmanship is an art form no one enjoys. Students write on slates using chalk, which has the satisfying ability to screech just as you're starting to concentrate. The Bible is central to the curriculum. Reading it aloud teaches elocution, morality, and how to pronounce 17th century names no one ever says out loud in polite company. Arithmetic follows, a series of word problems that involve barrels, bushels, and exactly one apple-related tragedy. School is technically free, but families often pay in firewood, food, or other helpful bribes. Attendance is encouraged, though not strictly enforced, especially during planting season, harvest season, or days ending in Y, when the weather is good. Girls are allowed, depending on the town's attitude and the teacher's patience. They usually leave earlier than boys to help at home, though a bright girl might outspell every lad in the room before returning to peel turnips. The classroom is filled with the sounds of scratching slates, murmured lessons, and the occasional sigh that says, "I will never need to know this unless I become a merchant," or a particularly dramatic letter writer. At the end of the day, students leave a little smarter, slightly hungrier, and significantly more suspicious of chalk. Their handwriting is crooked, their slates are dusty, and their minds are full of facts they will repeat with proud, mispronounced authority to anyone who will listen, including the chickens. As the sun begins its descent over the crooked rooftops of Boston, a certain gravitational pull starts to take hold toward the taverns. Not all will indulge, of course. Some have chores, others have dignity, but many find that a wooden mug and a wooden bench provide just the right ambience for forgetting the day's minor injuries and major grievances. Taverns in colonial Boston are more than just watering holes. They're meeting places, news hubs, unofficial post offices, and part-time theatrical venues. The drinks are hearty, the food is questionable, and the atmosphere is thick with the scent of tobacco, spilled ale, and deeply held political opinions, mostly about fence lines and taxes. The tavern keeper knows everyone's name, debt level, and preferred corner. A good tavern is judged by its warmth, its ale, and the predictability of its floorboards. Too quiet, suspicious, too lively. You're about to witness a spirited debate that begins with, "I respect your view, but," and ends with someone being asked to leave before the soup course. Drinks include beer, cider, rum punch, and a thing called shrub, a vinegar-based beverage for those who like their refreshment with a side of regret. Wine is available, but only for those pretending to be refined or trying to impress someone who owns more than one waistcoat. Food is served, usually something stewed, smoked, or stubborn. Pickled eggs are popular for reasons historians still debate. A bowl of stew might feature mystery meat, but no one asks questions if the bread is good. Occasionally there's pie, which may or may not contain fruit. It's best not to investigate too closely. Games are played in the dim corners, cards, dice, and the ever-popular "who can name the most cousins without repeating." Tobacco is smoked liberally, and pipes are shared like opinions, frequently, loudly, and with very little filtering. As evening deepens, the tavern glows with candlelight, laughter, and the unspoken agreement that tomorrow's problems can wait until at least sunrise. For now, there is a fire in the hearth, a mug in hand, and a room full of people pretending they didn't nearly lose a finger chopping wood this morning. As night settles over Boston, the streets empty like a theatre after a mediocre play. Shops shutter with a thunk. The market stalls are cleared or left to the mercy of enterprising raccoons, and windows flicker to life with candlelight. At home, families reconvene, tired, a little smudged, and already talking about tomorrow's weather, like it's a dramatic plot twist. The evening routine is less a series of chores and more a series of rituals designed to coax warmth and sanity from a house that creaks like an old sailor. Candles are lit with tallow that smells like an animal you didn't particularly like when it was alive. Wicks sputter, shadows dance, and every room takes on the intimate, slightly gothic glow of low-budget theatre lighting. The hearth is stoked, carefully, because fire is both essential and one good sneeze away from disaster. Ashes are pushed aside, logs are nudged, and someone always pokes the fire like they're expecting a secret. A pot of leftover stew simmers lazily, contributing its robust aroma to the entire house and at least one article of clothing. Clothing is changed, if you're lucky enough to own something worth changing into. Nightshirts appear, long and shapeless, the 18th century answer to comfort wear. Woolen socks are pulled up, caps tied under chins, and if someone's feet are still cold, they blame that one window that's always letting in air, ghosts, or both. The house itself is quiet, except for the occasional cough, the distant snore of a relative who fell asleep in the chair again, or the rhythmic thud of someone trying to find a chamber pot in the dark. Doors creak, floors groan, and the walls seem to exhale after a long day of holding themselves up. Children wind down with stories, not always for entertainment, but to keep them from inventing terrifying fables on their own. Tales involve foxes, clever farmers, or morals that feel suspiciously aimed at the listener. Books are rare, but cherished. If you're lucky, you own one Bible, one almanac, and one book about geography that still insists dragons live near the poles. As the fire dwindles and candles gutter, the house begins to settle. There's nothing left to do but lie still, listen to the wind, and hope the pudding doesn't burn on the hearth again. While most of Boston settles into a polite arrangement of snores and wool blankets, a small cast of unfortunate souls is just getting started. Night in the colonial town may seem still, but beneath the quiet are the subtle movements of the necessary and the slightly begrudging. First among these are the bakers, rising well before the rest of the city to coax loaves into existence by dawn. Their ovens are brick-lined, temperamental, and hotter than the devil's armpit. Dough is shaped by hand, flour is everywhere, and the air smells of yeast, smoke, and the bittersweet scent of people who haven't had coffee because it doesn't exist yet in any meaningful form. Bread is serious business. No one wants to explain a burned batch to a crowd of hungry, passive-aggressive Bostonians at sunrise. Then there are the night watchmen. Each carries a lantern, a staff, and a voice trained to yell, "All's well," every hour, whether it is or not. It's less about security and more about assuring the neighborhood that no one has spontaneously combusted. They walk a circuit of muddy streets, cloak pulled tight, occasionally stopping to scold cats, chase away vagrants, or pretend they didn't hear that very suspicious thud from behind the fishmonger's stall. The docks never fully sleep either. Late shipments, tide-sensitive arrivals, and the vague mystery of maritime schedules keep a few figures moving down by the water. Lanterns bob, crates shift, and somewhere a sailor is trying to explain to a goat why it can't come on board again. Even homes not entirely still. Babies cry. Elderly relatives mutter in their sleep. Someone stubs a toe on the bed frame and tries, heroically, not to swear. A few industrious souls stitch by candlelight, unwilling or unable to rest. The silence is not complete, but it is companionable, shared by those who work in the dark, not because it's poetic, but because the bread won't bake itself. In this quiet slice of night, Boston breathes slowly, the fire crackles, footsteps fade, and the whole town waits, more or less patiently, for the rooster to start screaming again. Cleanliness in colonial Boston is a complicated subject, mainly because it involves water, effort, and a tolerance for discomfort that borders on heroic. Personal hygiene isn't ignored, it's just interpreted loosely, very loosely. In theory, everyone aspires to be clean. In practice, most people aim for not noticeably grimy. Baths happen, but not daily, or weekly, or for some folks, with any particular schedule at all. A full bath involves hauling gallons of water from the well, heating it over a fire, pouring it into a wooden tub, and then sitting in it while trying not to think about how many people in the household used it before you. Bathwater is reused, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Eldest to youngest is the order of operations, which means the last child in line is basically getting a soup experience. More common is the sponge bath, which sounds much fancier than it is. A cloth, a basin, and some chilly water get the job done. The goal here isn't sparkle. It's reducing the visible evidence of one's profession. Soap is involved occasionally if you still have fingers left from making it last week. Teeth brushing is done with twigs, charcoal, or a sort of gritty homemade paste that suggests mint wasn't available, and everyone just decided to be brave about it. Mouthwash is sometimes vinegar. It's unclear whether this freshens the breath or just clears the room. Clothes are washed irregularly and with grim resolve. They are boiled, scrubbed, beaten against rocks, and then dried wherever there's space. Hedges, chairs, the arms of obliging relatives. Lye soap strips the dirt, and probably a few memories. Whites are prized, but not expected to stay that way for long. Mud, soot, and surprise animal encounters make sure of that. Hair is brushed with care, but washed rarely. Lice are a fact of life, as are bonnets and wigs, both of which serve as fashion statements and borderline pest control. Shaving is done by candlelight with razors that double as family heirlooms and, occasionally, minor weapons. Despite all this, people manage. They smell like effort and honesty, with faint notes of ash, wool, and soap that tried its best. And in a world where cleanliness is next to impossible, most folks settle comfortably for presentable. In colonial Boston, information travels at the speed of horse, or if you're truly unlucky, the speed of foot. Letters, newspapers, and pamphlets make their way through town with all the urgency of a man who's been promised lunch at the finish line. And still, the mail is eagerly awaited, often read aloud, and then reread because it's the most exciting thing that's happened since someone fell in the well last week. The post arrives at a tavern naturally, because why wouldn't the colony's primary communication hub also serve alcohol and pickled onions? Travellers and post riders drop off letters in saddlebags stuffed with everything from legal notices to love poems written with more enthusiasm than talent. The postmaster, who doubles as a barkeep, landlord, and occasional peacemaker, sorts them with a mixture of care and dramatic flair. Mail is picked up in person, sometimes days after arrival. If your name is called, it's a small moment of triumph. If it's mispronounced, even better. It gives everyone a new way to gossip about you. Privacy is largely theoretical. If you don't want your letter read aloud by the fireplace with commentary, best to open it in the privy. Paper is precious, ink more so. Most letters are folded into themselves with wax seals, an elaborate handwriting that dares you to decipher it. Spelling is flexible, grammar is creative, but the messages are heartfelt, ranging from weather complaints to detailed inventories of goats and requests for more spoons. Then there's the newspaper. Boston's print culture is alive and well, with broadsheets circulating once or twice a week, depending on supply, enthusiasm, and whether the printing press broke again. News includes ship arrivals, sermon summaries, marriage announcements, runaway indentured servant notices, and thrilling updates about the price of molasses. Editorials are passionate, verbose, and occasionally written by someone who really just wanted to win an argument in print. People gather to listen, argue, and occasionally misunderstand everything. Debates spring up over the meaning of certain phrases, the reliability of sources, and whether the editor has a personal vendetta against someone in town. He probably does. And so the town stays informed, entertained, and just a little bit nosy. Because in a world without internet, Mail Day is practically a festival, one with ink stains. Even in the milder months, Boston carries the faint breath of winter like a warning cough. And when the true cold arrives, which it always does, enthusiastically and uninvited, colonial homes brace for the annual drama known as surviving. Firewood becomes currency, drafty windows become philosophical, and every household is in a long-term relationship with its hearth. The fireplace is the heart of the home, warm, temperamental, and slightly smoky. It heats the space, cooks the food, dries the socks, and occasionally smokes out a squirrel. But it's also incredibly inefficient. Much of the heat escapes straight up the chimney, as if waving goodbye on its way to better houses. Firewood must be chopped, hauled, stacked, and jealously guarded. A full woodpile is a thing of beauty, a half-full one a reason to panic quietly. Wood is sorted by type, oak for long burns, pine for quick heat, and whatever scraps can be scrounged when desperation sets in. The axe is never far from reach, and neither is the urge to mutter about how much warmer it probably is in Virginia. Houses are insulated in the colonial sense, which means hope and a few wool blankets. Walls are thick, but not in the comforting modern way, more in the "we found this gap behind the cupboard again" kind of way. Windows are covered in oiled paper or heavy drapes, and still the cold slinks in like a nosy aunt. Clothing becomes armor. Layer upon layer is added until movement becomes a kind of slow, interpretive dance. Wool is everywhere, on heads, feet, shoulders, and occasionally pets, who didn't sign up for this. Mittens are worn indoors. So are hats. At a certain point, everyone just accepts that toes are a summer concern. Nights are the coldest part of the daily ordeal. Warm bricks are wrapped in cloth and tucked into beds to serve as DIY foot warmers. Beds are shared not just for affection, but survival. Privacy loses the war to body heat almost immediately. And yet, somehow, life continues. Children play in the snow, icicles decorate the eaves, and someone always claims they don't mind the cold, usually while turning blue. Winter in Boston isn't conquered. It's tolerated, layered against, and occasionally cursed at behind the woodpile. Sunday morning in Colonial Boston arrives not with fanfare but with bells. Loud, earnest bells that echo through the crooked streets with the urgent insistence of a sermon in need of listeners. Church is not optional. It is the event, the social, spiritual, and sartorial centerpiece of the week, which is unfortunate because most people would rather be in bed, or at least not wearing wool in 3 layers. The process begins early. Clothes are inspected, brushed, and aired out like diplomatic letters. For many, this is the only day their second-best waistcoat or petticoat sees daylight. Children are scrubbed to a shine that suggests someone's reputation is on the line. Hair is combed, teeth are checked, and shoes, if you have a matched pair, are polished with something that may or may not have been butter last week. The walk to church is long, cold, and morally upright. Families travel in stiff lines, bundled like burritos of modesty. No one talks much, not because they're reflecting deeply, but because talking invites comment, and comment invites shame. Shame in Colonial Boston is practically a communal sport. Church itself is held in the meeting house, which looks like a barn with ambitions. Inside, wooden pews await, arranged in rows that offer excellent acoustics for creaking and sighing. There is no heat. There are no cushions. Just you, your neighbors, and several hours of spiritual endurance testing. The minister takes the pulpit, clears his throat like he's about to start a revolution, and begins the sermon. It's long. It's thorough. It's occasionally shouted. Topics include sin, more sin, the dangers of smiling too much, and the ongoing war against fiddle music. Congregants listen with a mix of fear, interest, and strategic mental wandering. The children are given catechisms or strict instructions not to fidget. They fidget anyway. After the service, the churchyard becomes a polite theatre of greetings, sideways glances, and intense discussion about whose ox escaped again. News is exchanged. Marriages are hinted at. And someone always brings up a theological point so complicated that everyone nods just to move on. Then is home for a quiet meal and careful reflection, or a nap, depending on one's level of spiritual achievement. And with that, the Sabbath is observed, respected, and survived. Until next week. Same bell, same pew, same sermon, possibly new sin. While the men of Boston hammer, saw, and loudly discuss wood grain, colonial women are engaged in a quieter but no less important economy, one held together by baskets, needles, and the sheer willpower of someone who hasn't sat down since sunrise. Behind every well-fed family is a woman selling something, bartering for something else, or discreetly profiting off a batch of pickles. Many women run informal shops out of their homes. A front room becomes a place of business, selling candles, combs, cakes, or small goods that people definitely need more of, especially if their neighbor has one. These shops operate on a blend of reputation, availability, and passive-aggressive pricing. The sign may say open, but the face behind the table will tell you if you're welcome. Sewing and mending are reliable sources of income. A skilled seamstress can earn respect, if not riches, by producing waistcoats that fit without insult and gowns that impress without scandal. Needlework is done by firelight, often late into the evening, and occasionally with whispered curses when the thread tangles for the 7th time. Lace-making, embroidery, and other fiddly arts are sold in town or traded for goods, sometimes in combinations that would confuse an economist and delight a grandmother. Food production is another stronghold. Bread, cheese, butter, preserves, if it can be boiled, jarred, or salted into submission, someone will buy it. Women carry baskets to market with the solemn pride of someone who knows how long it took to keep the chickens out of the strawberry patch. Their customers range from grateful to fussy, to insist on smelling everything before purchasing. Midwifery is a respected, if intense, profession. Midwives possess knowledge that is both practical and slightly mystical, and they are called upon in emergencies, births, and every situation that begins with "something seems off." Payment is often in goods, bread, blankets, or the occasional overly generous chicken. And then there's the social economy. Favors exchanged, secrets kept, introductions made over pickling barrels. Gossip isn't just entertainment. It's market research, community infrastructure, and informal currency. In a world where formal power is rarely theirs, Boston's women run entire economies with aprons full of pins, minds full of figures, and eyes that see everything, which, as any neighbor will tell you, is exactly why you don't skip paying for your butter. Colonial Boston, like all towns with aspirations of decency, runs on a delicate system of civic order, neighborly obligation, and a rotating cast of volunteers who mostly didn't volunteer. The streets don't clean themselves. Wells don't repair their own crank handles. And the stocks, yes, those stocks, require periodic tightening. Welcome to the thrilling world of public works. Every male citizen of appropriate age is expected to pitch in on certain community upkeep duties. These include, but are not limited to, mending fences, digging ditches, and hauling things that are definitely heavier than originally described. There is also the time-honored tradition of road labor, in which citizens flatten and recover sections of road with gravel, logs, or vague optimism. Each town meeting includes at least one heated discussion about drainage. Always drainage. Nothing gets a room of 18th century men more animated than soggy crossroads and mysterious puddles that appear without invitation and never leave. Committees are formed. Opinions are voiced. Nothing changes. Night soil removal is an unfortunate necessity, and while officially managed by contracted labourers, it's the kind of job that's only noticed when it's not done. Chamber pots are emptied discreetly, sometimes less discreetly, and their contents carted out of town to fertilise nearby fields or ruin someone's afternoon. Public wells are maintained with community effort and constant reminders not to drop things into them. Tools, hats, small children. Town criers sometimes relay well updates like it's breaking news. The North Pump is back in service. Please stop yelling at it. There are also the stocks and pillory, tools of both punishment and public shaming, maintained with quiet diligence by someone who probably enjoys the job a little too much. They're placed in central areas where they serve both justice and afternoon entertainment for people with long memories and good aim. Fences, gates, and the meeting house itself are painted, patched, and grumbled about regularly. Nails are in short supply. Opinions are not. And through it all, the town persists, held together by shared labour, mild resentment, and the understanding that if your neighbour fixes the south fence post, you're morally obligated to at least pretend to notice. Civic duty in Boston. A little chaotic, slightly muddy, and always worth complaining about afterward. Every so often, Boston's normal routines of work, worry, and washing are punctuated by something far more exhilarating. Court day. A chance for justice to be served, grievances to be aired, and neighbours to sit in judgment of each other with the full force of the law, and an encouraging amount of popcorn-style interest. The local court handles civil disputes, petty crimes, and the occasional moral panic. It's held in the meeting house or town hall, depending on which building is less drafty that week. The magistrate sits at a raised desk, robed in seriousness, occasionally adjusting his wig with the dramatic flair of someone who knows everyone's watching. Because they are. Cases are rarely dramatic, unless you count the time someone was accused of letting his pigs wander into the churchyard again. Most involve debts, boundary disputes, missing items, and deeply personal conflicts about who promised what during cider season. The courtroom is packed with onlookers, all pretending to be disinterested while listening with the rapt focus of hens watching someone dig up worms. Testimonies are delivered under oath, usually by neighbours who speak with a mix of sincerity and strategic vagueness. Witnesses may include the aggrieved party, two friends who saw part of the incident, and someone who just really enjoys being helpful in public. The punishments range from fines and public apology to time in the stocks, or, in very special cases, a warning that might as well be a scarlet letter. More serious cases are sent up the chain, but most are settled locally with a stern word and the understanding that everyone will continue to bump into each other for the rest of their natural lives. Lawyers are rare and not always welcome. Most people represent themselves with the confidence of someone who's absolutely sure they were in the right, even if they've forgotten what the dispute was about halfway through their third sentence. Court days are also gossip days. Who wore what? Who cried? Who stormed out in a huff? It's all noted and folded into the town's unofficial record, which is kept alive through back fence whispers and well-timed sighs. Justice in colonial Boston may not always be swift, but it's public, memorable, and just structured enough to keep things polite. Mostly. In colonial Boston, love does not bloom in moonlight, so much as it cautiously peeks out from under a bonnet and hopes no one reports it to the deacon. Courting is a ritual of patience, propriety, and mutual eye contact across very respectable distances. Romance is not forbidden, but it is very supervised. Young men and women meet through church, family connections, or neighborhood events, where everyone's pretending not to be evaluating potential matches, while absolutely evaluating potential matches. Courtship is less falling in love and more, please provide a thorough character reference and a ledger of your assets. The first step in courtship usually involves one party asking permission from both sets of parents, the local minister, and possibly a neighbor just for good measure. Once approval is granted, with a nod that says, "Don't embarrass us," the young couple is allowed to sit together, often in the parlor, with at least one relative in the same room pretending to read. Conversations revolve around practical matters: how many chickens one can manage, favorite types of wood, theological preferences. There may be blushing. There is definitely no touching. If someone reaches for a hand, it's either a marriage proposal or someone's fainting. Bundling is occasionally practiced, depending on the family and the weather. This charming and slightly baffling custom involves a courting couple sharing a bed, fully clothed, sometimes sewn into sacks, often with a wooden plank between them, to talk through the night without actually doing anything scandalous. It is part romance, part lumber storage. Gifts are exchanged cautiously. A carved spoon, a bit of ribbon, or a hand-sewn item all say, "I like you," in a way that conforms to societal expectations. Anything too lavish might suggest extravagance. Anything too plain suggests you're just not trying. It's a delicate balance. Once a couple is engaged, the whole town knows about it within 15 minutes. Engagements are announced during Sunday services, usually with proud nods from parents and suspiciously long prayers from the minister. Weddings follow weeks or months later. Simple affairs with more stew than lace, and the understanding that everyone is just here for the cake and the chance to finally dance a little. In Boston, love may be quiet, structured, and fully dressed in wool, but it's sincere, and if you can make it through the courting process without scandal, you've got what it takes for marriage, or at least a very strong appreciation for bundled conversations. Colonial Boston doesn't rush. It trudges, creaks, and occasionally sighs its way through the seasons like a town with places to be, but not urgently. Life here is not measured in grand events, but in cycles of planting, chopping, mending, and waiting. Waiting for crops to grow, for stew to boil, for shoes to dry, for your neighbor to return the rake. Spring arrives like a damp handshake, promising warmth, but bringing mud. Gardens are planted with cautious optimism, seeds tucked into reluctant soil. Summer follows with sweat and insects, both of which seem to multiply out of spite. Autumn is crisp and golden, a time for harvesting, preserving, and pretending you're not already thinking about how cold it's about to get. And winter, of course, is the final boss of daily life. Cold, stern, and unrelentingly smug. Each day unfolds in its own modest pattern. Morning chores, midday meals, afternoon tasks, evening routines. People rise with the sun, eat by the hearth, and sleep with one eye open for raccoons or restless toddlers. Time is kept by church bells, shadows, and the sound of your stomach reminding you that dinner was mostly turnips again. Holidays are sparse and mostly practical. Thanksgiving, harvest feasts, maybe a day off if something big happened in town that wasn't a fire. But there is joy, in its own flinty way, in the first loaf of spring bread, in a letter from a cousin who didn't get scurvy, in sitting quietly by the fire with your feet warm and your conscience mostly clear. Children grow. Old people grumble more eloquently with age. Apprentices become masters. Chickens mysteriously disappear and reappear as dinner. The rhythms are slow, sometimes monotonous, often muddy, but deeply human. And in their quiet way, deeply comforting. There are no grand finales here, no fireworks, no revolutions, just another night in Boston. Candles flickering low, boots drying by the hearth, and the steady sound of a town gently sleeping through another day that looked a lot like the one before. And that really is the point.